Thank you all so much for being here tonight. My name is Anya Sizer. I'm the democracy lead for the think tank Compassion in Politics, and I'm really delighted to be hosting part 2 of our series looking at loneliness and social isolation and how we can do something about that as a collective. It's part of a wider series of webinars where we're going to be looking at the big issues in society that can often leave us feeling really overwhelmed and just not quite sure how to make a start on the issues. So we started with a very light topic, looking at the rise of the far right a few months back and what we could do to help and to really add our voices into that as an issue. We've done 2 after tonight on loneliness, and we're going to be looking at other big issues. But for me, it came out of a real gut feeling of actually there are so many different things going on at the moment, nationally and internationally. And I'm often left feeling really quite overwhelmed. And where do I start? I want to make a difference, but it can feel quite overwhelming. And that's where this webinar series comes in. So we want to look together at some of the big topics, but then think together, right, how can we help? What can we do to make that difference? And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the most wonderful panel tonight. I feel very, very lucky hosting this evening. So I know we're in for a really good time. We will be recording it, so it will be available afterwards online. And we will be asking our very wise guests to pen 1 or 2 thoughts so that we can get them online as well. And you can look at what some of the key points are from all of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to ask them to just say a couple of words to introduce themselves, and we'll do it in the order that people are going to be speaking in. So Lisa, if you just introduce yourself, and then Krish, Sonia and Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here tonight. I'm Lisa Hollins. I lead the British Red Cross in the UK.
Good evening, everyone. Krish Kandiah. I am the founding director of the Sanctuary Foundation.
Evening, everyone. I'm Sonia. I'm a GP in North London.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan. I'm an ordained priest in the Church of England, most recently based in St Leonard's in Shoreditch.
Amazing. I'm currently rugby tackling my dog to try and get her to A, calm down, and B, not scratch at the door. So apologies if there's slight barking in the background. Back to tonight's topic. It's such an important one. And when I was doing a little bit of research, even just scraping the surface about what this is about, there's some really stark statistics around this. So, for example, 49% of adults report that actually they feel lonely at some stage or other, with 7%, so getting on for 10% of the population, 7% saying that they experience chronic loneliness. So it's huge numbers of people that actually say they're really battling with this. There's some key groups that are slightly more affected than others. Generally, young people will say that they're experiencing loneliness maybe more than other groups. Women often do. And there's some key groups that really experience that loneliness and social isolation. But why does that matter? Why are we discussing this tonight? Well, there's lots of reasons, but I really want to state that loneliness is an holistic encounter. It really does affect us holistically. We're not designed to feel that. We're designed for community and to feel connected to other people. So loneliness can really get to the heart of who we are and how we perceive ourselves. There's certainly health implications, and I know Sonia is going to touch on that later. There's certainly socio-economic implications for this. For us here at Compassion in Politics as a think tank, there's some political implications as well. When people are feeling isolated or marginalised, not connected to other people, it's very easy for them to either be scapegoated or to seek groups that maybe look like they're offering quick solutions to isolation that maybe don't always have people's best interests. So from a political perspective and from a societal perspective, it's really important that we look at this collectively and think, what can we do? What's our part in this? So there is a big problem and there are some really big issues around it. And I guess conversely, where I want to start tonight is by saying, if you are watching this and you're either feeling in that space yourself for many good reasons, or you're someone working to help in this space, I just want you to hear that you are not alone. And if you hear one thing from the panelists this evening, that is the message that I'd want you to hear, is you're not on your own. There are many good people working in this, and reach out, get the support that you deserve. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Lisa to tell us a little bit more about the work of the Red Cross and what they've been doing, for which we are incredibly grateful. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Anya. I'm just going to say a few words about the British Red Cross and the support that we give in the UK. And then I wanted to talk about what we've learned and perhaps how we can all join together to help. So firstly, in terms of the work that we do, we provide support to people who've got the greatest challenges within the UK, and we really try and tailor our support. So we support about 90,000 people who are trying to manage their health conditions at home, just to try and support them with those connections and their confidence in managing their conditions. We're also the biggest provider of support to people experiencing migration and displacement. So we supported just over 42,000 people last year. And these are people who are at major transitions in their life and are very vulnerable to loneliness and gaps in connection with others. And then the final work we do is probably the work we're most well known for. We respond to crises every 4 hours, and in the UK that's often floods, fires, and storms in the UK, and around the world, all sorts of things that we respond to. And what we've learned is that people who have all of those different challenges, if you've got the greatest challenges, you're more likely to experience loneliness. And this is where we really do have to help and support people who are going through these major transitions. Sometimes it's a transition where people have lost a loved one, they've moved to a new town, or that they are not as fit and able as they were, but they're very, very vulnerable during those times of transition. We worked with people last year just to hear their feedback for what help and support they wanted in communities, and they described chronic crisis. So people feeling that they are, as Anya described, overwhelmed with one crisis after another. And in some cases, it was the cost of living, where people had to choose between going out and heating. So they were making choices not to go to the gathering or the family wedding that they'd been looking forward to, because they wanted to heat their home, which of course, I mean, that will have a big impact on their well-being. And we saw that often people who are experiencing challenges have been experiencing them for a long time, and certainly, Anya, there was a feeling that people had one vulnerability after another, and really needed a lot of support from people around them or different organisations to really help them overcome those barriers. Often people experience trauma, but there are people who absolutely need our help and support for quite a period of time, but are major success stories when they turn around. So in terms of what we can do, we've been working in schools, and we supported about 1.5 million people last year, and have been trialling our humanitarian education programme. And this programme works with young people, but we can work with people of all ages to support them to feel resilient, to be connected to their communities, to have empathy for people in migration who are migrating, and to know what to do in a crisis. So we're really trying to support the next generation of future humanitarians who will know exactly what to do in a crisis. There's always opportunities for volunteering, and certainly the feedback we got is that those local groups, and you're going to hear from a number of people who work with local groups, are so important for people's well-being. So thank you to all the speakers today for really making it such a difference in their communities. And I just wanted to end on one point about the history of the International Red Cross, which was set up over 150 years ago to make sure people knew what happened to their loved ones who were experiencing conflict. So during the Second World War, we have still saved the 5 million messages that we sent between families and people serving in the Second World War. They're in one of our museums, but those connections, just getting a message and hearing back from somebody is so important to the well-being of colleagues. And we do lots of work internationally now to try and support families who've become separated when fleeing from conflict, and had some fantastic successes from people just before Christmas who were separated in Gaza and separated in Afghanistan. So wanted to end on that heartwarming message, and then hand back to yourself, Anya.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'll never forget the first time I had a meeting with, I think it was the two Lisas, and just feeling so incredibly encouraged by the work that you're doing. Like when we spoke to the Joe Cox Foundation about the work on loneliness, it's just really encouraging. And I wonder if you could just mention the Red Cross. Is it your motto about kindness, or is it go on, if you could share with everyone?
No, the power of kindness is what we use to really underpin all of our services.
Wonderful. And yeah, I love that concept of it being a thread through all the various amazing things you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing. We'll come back to so much of what I want to unpick in a few moments, but I'm going to hand over now to the wonderful Krish Kandiah to talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing.
Thanks, Anya. Good evening, everyone. So I want to tell you a little bit about the origin story of the work that we're doing. So my charity is a tiny little one. Unlike Lisa's, we have 3 people that work in our charity. We see ourselves as a catalyst. And I guess our earliest use case was when a few Home Secretaries ago, Priti Patel was a little bit slow in responding to the crisis in Ukraine. And we said that we might do some kind of humanitarian sponsorship program, but there wasn't any detail. And I was worried that a sponsorship program, having worked with Syrians, can take a year or 18 months to get set up, and that'll be a bit slow, while everybody was keen to do it now. So we managed to get a little website together, and we got people to pledge. We said, there's no government scheme, but if there was one, would you be willing to welcome Ukrainian women and children into your home? And we were shocked that in the course of a couple of hours, 1,000 people said they would. And that was enough for BBC Breakfast to give us a call and say, could you come on and talk about it? And we said, oh, yeah, sure. And I knew we were onto something because I was giving, getting ready, and there's a lady that comes and does your kind of makeup just so you don't shine too much. And she was the floor manager. And then when we finished our 3 minutes on the sofa with Dan Walker, she came up. She said, oh, I've pledged. I've signed up on my phone. I've pledged to welcome a Ukrainian family. And I've started Googling Ukrainian recipes because I want to be ready when my Ukrainian family come, that I'll be able to cook them something that will make them feel at home. And I thought, this is going to work. And in the end, about 29,000 people signed up and said they would be willing to help. And then the government agreed a scheme, and we with Red Cross and many other charities kind of got involved to help support that scheme. And now there's about 250,000 Ukrainians here in the UK, and the majority were hosted in people's homes like yours and mine. And for me, that was such an exciting moment because it meant during a difficult time, everyone was still recovering from COVID and financial crisis, people were willing to open their homes to strangers. And a lot of the people that did that had never done anything with refugees before, never given any money, never read a book, never watched a TV program, but they had empathetically connected with Ukrainians. And we just did a survey of that group of hosts. And most of them said, yeah, I'll do it again. I'll do it for another group. These folks have become like family to us. They're not just hosts that we looked after. They've become family to us. And I thought that was powerful, isn't it? And just on the loneliness side, there were lots of people that said, this has been one of the most significant things I've done in my life. I was feeling a bit empty and lost, but being able to offer hospitality to another person was a game changer. And for me, that comes back to, I guess, my family history. My mother moved to the UK as a young woman. She'd been in an orphanage because she was from the wrong racial makeup. She was half white and half brown, and in the time when she lived in India, that had a horrible name attached to it. You were called half caste. I apologise if you find that offensive, but that's what my mother was called. And so I was put into an orphanage and forgotten about. And then a grand aunt in the United Kingdom found her, brought her to the UK, reunited her with her sisters, and she decided to give something back to society by training to be a nurse. And Britain in the 50s and 60s wasn't the most inclusive place on the planet, and people used to mock her for having brown skin and used to say, why don't you go black home to your own country? And my mum was going, hang on, I was too brown to be in a white family and too white to be in a brown family, and now somehow I'm too black to be in the United Kingdom. And as a nurse, some of the patients wouldn't let my mum touch them. They said, could we have a white nurse, please? Can you imagine a teenager feeling that sense of isolation and loneliness from racial prejudice, far away from what she'd known as home? And my mum decided to fight a one-woman resistance campaign to this racism. And on a Friday night, she'd open up her home, she'd cook a big vat of curry and rice, and anyone who felt like they didn't fit in was welcomed around my mother's table. And there would be, other international students, other nurses, everyone who felt like they were an outsider. This was a little oasis of kindness and compassion. And I took away from that you can fight hostility with hospitality. That's what the British nation did with all the cruelty that was going on from Russia into Ukraine. We decided to fight that through kindness and hospitality, and it's such a powerful way, I think, that we can make a dent in the world. We can't change everybody's life, but we can maybe change one life, and by investing in that person, we find a little bit more of ourselves. Actually, we find who we are by giving and being generous and kind to others. So that's a little bit of story of Sanctuary. If we have time later, I'd love to tell you a little bit about our family story with fostering and adoption, because similarly, driven by that desire to show hospitality to people in need, we've kind of grown our family from 3 birth children to 6. And again, being able to meet someone else's need, a child that would otherwise feel isolated, abandoned, lonely, being able to step into that space is an incredible privilege. And it's hard work and it'll break your heart, but it's incredibly rewarding. And so I think since we've been involved in this form of hospitality, I can't remember a time when we felt lonely, because as we stepped out to meet the needs of others, we found community for ourselves as well as offering it to others.
I love that. That's the second fantastic phrase this evening as well. So we've had the kindness is power, and then what was it? Hospitality.
You fight hostility with hospitality.
I love that. Right, that's the second of 2 tea towels being made tonight. I love both of those. Fantastic. And again, it both feels pretty tangible, as in seeds of good ideas and then seeing them come to fruition. That's wonderful. Just going to encourage people to put any questions that they've got for the panelists in the chat. And we're going to move on to the wonderful Sonia to talk about what she sees as a GP and some of the health implications that we've already touched on. But if you could expand on that. Lovely to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anya, for having me. So when Anya asked me to come on this panel, I thought about it. And I guess loneliness is something that I see every day in my clinic. And initially I was thinking about a lot of my elderly patients. But then actually, and you touched on this, I realised that I'm seeing it a lot actually in many of my younger patients. And there's certain groups that I see a lot, particularly I see it in my in young mothers, particularly mothers who are immigrants here or don't have a family nearby. I see it in my patients who are carers. That's something that they talk about a lot. And a study found that 81% of carers in this country reported feeling lonely as a result of their caring role. And I also see it in some of my patients that have disabilities. And again, when we did the studies looking to this, showed that over half of people who have a disability report feeling lonely. And that increases to 77% of young people with disabilities. And I think, loneliness is a feeling and a concept, I guess we all understand. I think probably most of us have felt it at some point. But there's an increasing understanding that chronic loneliness is something that should be understood and addressed as a public health issue. So, and the relationship between health and loneliness goes both ways. So if you have a health condition, you're 3 times more likely to experience chronic loneliness. But also increasing research is showing that having chronic loneliness or lack of social interaction can lead to poor physical and mental health outcomes. And we think that's due to a combination of things. It can be due to, let's say, if you have loneliness, you may be doing certain behaviours that increase your risk of poor health, but also physiological reasons. So chronic loneliness, it is thought that it can increase your stress in the body, increase inflammation in the body, which leads to poor health. And just a few sort of stats for you. So chronic loneliness associated with a 29% increased risk of coronary heart disease. It's associated with a 32% increased risk of stroke. It's a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. It's a risk factor for chronic pain. Loneliness puts you at increased risk of poor mental health, particularly a risk factor for depression. And having chronic loneliness also increases your risk of cognitive decline and having dementia later on in life. And we also know that if you have chronic loneliness, you're more likely to use health services. So elderly people who are living alone are 50% are more likely to access emergency care services, and are 40% more likely to have more than 12 GP appointments per year. And then the most shocking research for me that I found on this was the relationship between chronic loneliness and premature mortality. So a study found that chronic loneliness can increase your risk of early mortality by 26%. And there was a study done in 2010 that showed the effect of loneliness and the effect of social isolation on early mortality is comparable to things like smoking and obesity. And I guess like in the NHS, we have initiatives to help people stop smoking. We have initiatives to help people lose weight. So we need to have that same approach on a national level and also locally to tackle loneliness. So how do we do that? I think we're starting to do this in a small way in general practice through our use of social prescribers. So for those of you who don't know, a social prescriber is someone that we will employ in our GP practice. And the idea is that they deal with what we call social issues. What we mean by social issues is when our patients have issues that are impacting their health, but they can't be addressed with a pure medical intervention, then they'll get referred to our social prescriber. And I was speaking to our social prescriber in our practice, and it was found that actually in Haringey, where I work, out of the referrals done to social prescribers, loneliness was seen as in the referrals one of the top 3 issues alongside housing and financial difficulties. So it's a massive issue in our area that I work. And then the idea of our social prescriber will then to talk to the patient and then try and, I guess, connect them or signpost them to organisations or initiatives in the area that could help with their issues. And this could be gardening groups, this could be community kitchens, this could be exercise classes, walking groups. And I spoke to our social prescriber and I said, could you give me a case? And she said, Sonia, I've got hundreds of cases I can give you, but I'll just give you like one little example. So we'll call this gentleman John. John was in his 70s. He went to see his GP because he was experiencing symptoms of severe depression and poor sleep. He recently had a bereavement. So our GP referred him to our social prescriber. She had conversations with him. She identified that loneliness was a particular issue and lack of social interaction. and also that he had previously had an interest in wildlife and gardening. So she suggested that he joined our local walking group in the marshes, and then caught up with him a few times afterwards. And then after he'd been to this walking group for a couple of months, that he said that the walking group had improved his companionship. It was giving him exercise. He was really, really enjoying it. He'd made friends through it. His mental health had significantly improved. His sleep had improved, and he felt that his physical health was significantly better from all the walking that he was doing. And then if you hear about all those outcomes, to me, that's more powerful than any antidepressant or any medication that I could have given this gentleman. So there's real power in these initiatives. So to finish, loneliness is something that we know affects our physical health, it affects our mental health. So we have to tackle this as a public health issue. And that requires us to think creatively. It requires us on a local level and a national level to create and support and invest in these initiatives that are improving social connectivity to ensure that they're sustainable. And the cost of these initiatives, something like a walking group, the cost of these initiatives is not much, but actually the potential benefits from having a society that is healthier, that's happier, that is more connected, those benefits are huge. So I'll finish it there. Thank you.
That's fantastic. And what I love about that, Sonia, is the gravitas it gives this topic. For so long, I think we've sort of skirted around the edges of this and sort of demeaned it and seen it as less of an issue than it is. But as soon as you share some of those statistics that you've just done, and as soon as you start talking about it as a public health necessity, it really does put it front and centre of where our focus should be. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for all the work that you do. I don't know how you do it, but thank you. So finally, over to our last panelist, Ryan, to talk a little bit about life on the ground in one of the most socially challenging areas of London, and the work that you've been doing. So over to you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you all, or virtually with you all this evening. And I'm really glad that we can have this conversation about, actually, as we've heard, what's an increasingly complex and more urgent issue. As Anya said, I'm an ordained priest in the Church of England. I've got about 9 years experience on the ground serving local communities through parish churches. Most recently, that's been in the parish church of Shoreditch in East London. If you've ever seen the TV program Rev, that was my church. That was the building right on the high street. That's probably where the similarities between me and Tom Hollander end, though. But we've had Krish and Anya come to speak as well, and so it's been incredible to hear from our panelists this evening. I'm learning lots, although Anya, don't expect any tea towel quotes from me, I don't think. But just to echo what Anya said, if you're on this call and you're facing or experiencing loneliness, you're really not alone. There is hope. Prior to moving to East London, I used to think loneliness wasn't really something that affected young people, my generation. I thought it was kind of exclusively something that older generations were facing. And yes, it's true in my role. A large part of my time on the ground serving local people has been, of all faiths and none, has been spending time with the elderly who are isolated, caring for people as they approach the end of life, either in hospital or in their home, often one of the few people to see them that week. But actually, I've been surprised by how much of the issue of loneliness has affected young people. I'm surprised by how much of an issue it's been for them. And daily, I have conversations with young adults, Gen Z, millennials, many of whom would never call themselves churchgoers, but they're seeking community and connection. They say for them, actually, this feeling of loneliness is a real challenge. And this rings true of the data as well. You've already heard from Anya some of the key statistics in the UK. And I think Sonia can speak to the fact in GPs, I read recently 1 in 5 appointments, not to do with physical health at all, but to do with things like loneliness. And we've already heard how young people are affected. But there was a new study that showed about 35% of Londoners, which as a city has the lowest median age of any city in the UK, report feeling lonely some of the time, compared with the national average of 28. So it's higher than the national average. But the issue of loneliness is particularly acute for the young adults that I've lived and served alongside in East London. Shoreditch and Hackney, one of the loneliest boroughs in London, where 40% of people, which is both higher than the national and the London average, report feeling loneliness some or all of the time. So it's a real issue for the people that I've served. And Shoreditch is a multi-generational community. It's hugely diverse. You'll know Brick Lane, known for its South Asian restaurants. The station, Shoreditch High Street, recently on the renamed Windrush line to acknowledge the contribution of the Windrush generation. So it's hugely diverse, multi-generational, but also incredibly creative. More startups per square mile than any other major city in Europe. So it's got this huge energy, this business, this commerce, arts and culture, this melting pot. But increasingly, I meet a very particular type of person, and I want to just paint a picture briefly, and I wonder whether this resonates to anyone's experience on this call or people you've met. It's a young adult, either straight from university or school, more and more from outside of the UK internationally, and they've moved to the big city. They've left their support network, left their childhood home, their family, their friends, left the world that they knew. And when you move to a new city, you'll know there's no automatic social infrastructure. You have to create that for yourself. Often you're not living with your friends or your families. You're not surrounded by people 24/7. This can come as a shock to the system for a lot of people I chat to. Most are single or unmarried. Add to that the really high rate of rent that often people have to pay, which can lead to short-term leases, which can lead to a feeling of instability. You don't know how long you're going to live in that community. So really, would you bother to put roots down to get to know your neighbor? It's very hard to have a sense of the local. Add to that COVID, this generation often called the COVID generation. We've seen what it done to social interactions. We thought, I probably like many people thought that COVID would bring about this digital revolution that would change everything. And to an extent it did. But I was interested to see how the opposite effect on young adults. They're more desperate for face-to-face connection. Change in our work patterns often mean working from home more, fewer contact hours in the office. Again, less social interaction. People are crying out for connection. It might not have gone unnoticed that last week was Valentine's Day. And I came across an article that talked about the rise of, we've seen the kind of speed, the online apps like Tinder, which ironically enough has its head offices in my parish in Shoreditch. I'd walk past on the gym. But those kind of online apps have seen their downloads declining in recent years. What's been on the increase, and you might have seen it in the news over the weekend, was a thing that's called slow dating. So it's not even speed dating anymore. It's slow dating. And one in Hampshire had a 12% increase. We saw this locally. There was a girl in her 20s, early 20s, in our congregation who started a kind of singles dating event, monthly dating event, and it kind of has blown up around East London. People are desperate for connection. Sonia spoke brilliantly about social prescribing, and you would have seen recently the health minister, Wes Streeting, had said that faith communities, they have a big part to play in that. We saw a lot during COVID. Often it was the faith communities that already had the infrastructure, the volunteer network to move quicker than actually a lot of other agencies did to respond to the need. So just briefly in closing, where is the hope? And I've seen what it looks like actually when diverse communities come together to serve one another, to prefer the other. Recently, we had a fire that hit one of our local housing estates. Over 100 firefighters were called. 150 local residents were displaced from this housing estate with nothing more than the clothes on their back. Often the people who lived in this estate were from the poorest socioeconomic background. Many were migrants. Some were refugees. But what we saw was it was right next to our church, and the church was the first to respond. We opened our doors, we offered warmth, clothes, food. I distinctly remember doing a Domino's order, which is the first thing we could think of to order. And quickly we'd assembled our volunteers who just lived in the local community. The police had sealed off the streets. No one was allowed to cross their cordon other than our volunteers and the emergency services. We were allowed to get to Sainsbury's to get essential supplies. We took out a trolley and filled it with as much food and bottles of water that we could to give to the people who'd just been displaced. And amidst all the kind of chaos and trauma and grief, a young family who'd been refugees from a war-torn country, they had a young daughter who was due to be studying her GCSE exam in English the next morning, but now was completely uncertain as to what would happen. And a young couple from the church opened their doors to that girl. They gave her a room to stay the night so she could study, sleep in peace before her exams the next day. People were rehoming pets. My wife took an interest in a sausage dog that caught her eye that she was obsessed with for the evening. But I saw in that instant, that's the people we wanted to be, and that's the people we can be. I've seen it with the people I've had the privilege to serve along. When the fire is burning around us, in our world, in our society, where there is chaos and pain, that people respond not with selfishness, but selflessness. They open their homes, they open their lives to build relationships, to serve communities, and to bring hope to the people around them. Thanks.
That is so encouraging. Thank you. And I absolutely will back up what Ryan's just said. It was so encouraging to speak to residents around that time who really felt very supported by what you did on the ground. And my favourite anecdote was all these people were trying to cross the barrier to get in, but one person with the dog collar, it was like the get out of jail free card was being waved. They managed to get over the barrier, and it was just a really good example of what people power can do. So thank you, and thank you for sharing that one. One of the key themes that's come up from all of you, actually really interesting, was also picked up as a question in the chat, so I'm going to open with that. This concept of someone's written, do you think loneliness has become so prevalent for young people? And do you think that it is as stigmatized to admit loneliness for that age group? So Lisa, I'd love to start with you because you touched on that, as did you all actually, that demographic. Why do you think it's affecting young people more? Is it affecting young people more? Is it being talked about more? What have you seen as part of the Red Cross? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Anya. We have done a piece of research with young people who spoke to us about a lot of some of the social connections and things that I suppose brought them energy have now either closed down or been moved online. So it feels like a different world, doesn't it, to 5 years ago? And I think people are still grappling with understanding what does that mean? Where can I get my connections that I need? Because it's restorative, isn't it, for every individual? So where do I get that? So I think in terms of young people, there are concerns about how isolating being a young person is, and concerns about mental health, which we know is linked to some of those areas of social connection. So I think much more work to do, and we are recovering from events over the last 5 years, but haven't completely recovered, I think, from events over the last 5 years. And I think people are getting to grips with what the new world looks like. So definitely for young people, is it stigmatized? I'm sure it is, really, because what we see often now is idealized pictures of people perhaps on social media, and it's harder to say, actually, this is not working for me, or I need to do something differently. And of course, seeing people human to human in person is a completely different feeling to seeing people online. So definitely, I think it is an issue.
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? And I think the role of social media, as you brought up, is really key. It can be fantastic, but it can also be very difficult.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Well done. Thank you. Krish, you brought up that concept as well about loneliness in the younger generation. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't agree with what Lisa said, but I'd love to hear Sonia's perspective as a medic. I've been wrestling with this a little bit about the emotional resilience of that age range. So my son went to the same university as me, just a lot later than I did, and stayed on the same corridor that I did. And in my year, there were 16 people on the corridor, and one person dropped out of university because it was overwhelming and difficult for them. But in his year, this is pre-COVID, half the corridor left because they found it overwhelming. So I know that's just one little anecdote, isn't it? But there's something going on. And some of it, again, I'm no expert, that's why I'm asking the question, I guess, is we have become better at normalizing talking about mental health, loneliness, anxiety, which is fantastic. but at the same time, we seem to be lacking resilience. And this kind of really underlined me when I went to see a film. I think you've seen it as well, called A Real Pain, which should win an Oscar for something. It was a very powerful film. Jesse Eisenberg and not Macaulay Culkin, the brother,
Kieran Culkin.
and they're two Jewish young men in their kind of mid-30s, I'd say, and they retrace the steps of their grandmother who was in Poland in a concentration camp, and it's a bit of a kind of rite of passage trying to understand what she went through. And the question the film asks is, in the film, it's not a spoiler alert, Kieran has been wrestling with his mental health and has tried to commit suicide. And Jesse's going, well, hang on, our grandmother survived the Holocaust, but we're struggling to survive modern life. What's going on? And they don't resolve it, but I think there is something happening, and I don't understand what's happening. And I'd love a medical perspective. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, Sonia, right, we're going to look to you for all answers now, especially as you're feeling slightly poorly. This feels a bit mean, but
I'm lacking resilience today.
yeah, just be wise, as you always are. But that's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think that's a concept that comes up around resilience and how do you help people to gain that. And some of the things that you'd started to mention touched on that. But what are your thoughts on what Krish has just brought up?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting because, you know, we definitely see more mental health issues amongst young people, children and teenagers and young people. That's absolutely for sure on GP in primary care. And it's that sort of question of, is it because we're talking about it more, so people are more aware, or is it that mental illness is increasing in prevalence? And I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. But I also think we have to think maybe like society has changed a lot. You know, I had a young girl sort of this week, actually, last week, and she was how old is she? Maybe that sort of primary school age, actually. I think she was maybe sort of 10, 11, experiencing really bad mental health. And then when I sort of talked to her and worked out what's going on, a lot of it had been triggered by WhatsApp groups. So I guess so when I was at school, you'd go to school and maybe there was not, you know, sort of bullying or things happening at school, but at least you go home and then you're sort of protected from that. And I think actually this, you know, with social media, there isn't a people, and I feel as though I don't get a break. You know, you don't get a break anymore in the way that you used to. So maybe that could be contributing to it. And then for younger people as well, you know, there are many people now, and this has, I think, changed a lot since COVID, but previously you'd be going into an office 5 days a week, unless maybe that would be tiring and annoying, but actually you're interacting with people, you're having chats in the coffee room, you maybe go for drinks afterwards at work, there's social interaction happening. And there's many people now that are actually working from home majority of the week, which may feel more convenient and may feel easier, but actually not having that social interaction, I think, can, without us really realizing it, have a negative impact on your mental health, and that lack of resilience that we're talking about. And even, you know, things like this, you know, this event a few years ago would have been face to face. Now, it being online is great for access, it's great for people to see, but I'm sure maybe sort of previously would have had this event and then afterwards everyone would have had a little chit chat.
Yeah.
And we don't have that anymore. And it's similar again with GP. You know, I have a mixture of face-to-face appointments and telephone appointments. And my telephone appointments are quicker, but actually you don't have that extra chat. And I don't have that feeling of niceness after my telephone conversations as much as I do after my face-to-face conversations. There is something about real face-to-face interaction that just gives you this, you know, it gives you something that's inexplicable. But as you mentioned at the start, we do need social interaction, and society has become a lot more online, and I think we need to sort of understand the impact that has on our sort of, you know, how we feel.
Some really, really helpful points there. Thank you. Yeah, I think it is that balance of the ease of online and the accessibility and being able to open up things like this so that it's not, keeping people off them, but also the importance of meeting for a cup of coffee with someone. So key. Really great comment from Nicola Harker. Thank you. ex-GP on resilience is that the younger generation has become much more life has become much more anxiety provoking for the younger generation. We are bombarded with information from all over the world, not just dealing with stress from our immediate environment. So true. And I think our brains haven't caught up with the huge changes in the world. So I don't think they're less resilient, but bombarded with more negative information. I couldn't agree with that more, Nicola. Having an 18 and a 21-year-old as well as a 13-year-old, but the level of information that the older two are absorbing all the time, and there's not a lot of good news around at the moment. So it's very hard. I think that's a really, really helpful perspective. Wanted to bring in a really helpful point from Brian Ratner. Thank you, Brian, who said, for some people with neurodiverse conditions, forming relationships is difficult. There is a significant increase in the numbers of people with such conditions, which may form part of the picture. Could not agree with you more, Brian. And that's where it was really important when we were putting together tonight that we did use an intersectional lens. It's not just loneliness, one size fits all, but we all bring our own background, our own experience, race, gender, etc., and it then interplays with that, doesn't it? So the neurodiversity interplay is really, really key. And I just wonder if any of you from the panel have any thoughts about that, about neurodiversity and the impact of that. Lisa, have you seen anything, for example, with the work with the Red Cross around this?
I think some of the work that we do just acknowledges all sorts of different perspectives, ways of being that people have, and we do a lot of strength-based work just to try and build on the strengths that people have in their daily lives, acknowledging that there's huge perspectives that. And our work is, I suppose, really to help people build confidence and connection. So we start with that view and that approach. But we have, I don't think I could comment on whether there's an increase or not, but certainly building on people's strengths and all of the wonderful things that they do have without expecting consistency, I think is and just celebrating difference as being, it's our superpower, isn't it? As a race.
Yeah, thank you. And Krish, I just wanted to bring you in as well, because I know one of your real areas of passion, as well as mine, is around special needs. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts around how loneliness and special needs interplays.
Oh, that's a huge topic. I'll give you a little vignette. I was talking to a special advisor in the government about this. So you're probably fully aware of special educational needs. That's a huge challenge at the moment. Lots of local authorities really struggling with the financing of it. Lots of families feeling very isolated because their children aren't getting the support that they need at school. And it feels like every relationship has been adversarialized in the process. So my youngest foster son, we had him in mainstream education, and he got quite easily triggered by a loud noise in the classroom, and so a teacher very kindly thought that she could help him by teaching him in a corridor. And I think she was well intentioned, but it just meant my son felt isolated and lonely and rejected. There's something wrong with me that I can't be with the other kids in the class, and so there he is. And so he's finding school more anxiety inducing. The system now says that if your child doesn't want to turn up at school, then you're a bad parent. And so we've now turned back, people that aren't forcing their children to go to school into bad parents. Or if you speak up as a parent trying to, gently advocate on behalf of your child, you're a pushy parent, which also makes life complicated. So I think there is a lot of challenge around isolation, loneliness, both for children with additional needs and for their parents and carers who now feel very isolated, having to fight for everything. And I can't see a quick solution to it because there's a massive funding black hole. And I think ultimately funding is not probably the biggest challenge. I think we need a culture shift in the way that we embrace children and people with neurodiversity, learning difficulties, additional needs, social anxiety, and create spaces that are more welcoming with a culture of inclusion. So even though globally inclusion has become a dirty word,
I was just thinking that. I was just thinking that.
It's a shame, isn't it? We know we need to be better at this, but it's now become weaponized in the kind of culture war. And again, the culture war has so many negative outputs, which again is leading to polarization and isolation and further loneliness. So sorry, at the moment, a lot of all roads seem to lead to culture war in my world, whether that's working with Ukrainian refugees.
I think
educational needs.
I think you're right. And that's where conversations like this and the work of Compassion in Politics, amongst many other groups, it's so vital, because we don't want to just take that rhetoric and that way of thinking as the only way. We've got to say, actually, we celebrate diversity, we celebrate uniqueness, and let's look collectively at how to tackle these issues. Ken has put a wonderful comment in here, which I think will lead on to wrapping up questions for the panelists. But Ken says maybe we need to think about skills we need for coping with this new hyper-connected but increasingly lonely world. Overwhelm can lead to retreat. Do panel have ideas on this? So I think the heart of what is being said here is, what are the skills? What is the resilience that we can be sharing? I'm going to go to you first, Ryan, to summarize all of this in one sentence. But what are you feeling about the skills that we can be sharing with other people?
Yeah, that's great. And it's really important as well, I think, to address that idea of resilience and also like a long-term thing. I think that feeling of loneliness, if you've experienced it or you've seen people, can be so all-consuming and overwhelming. It's difficult to see a way out a lot of the time, I think. And I think, the people I'm thinking of who've said that to me, what I've seen over a long term is little incremental gains of, I guess that you call it risk, really. To have a conversation with someone is vulnerable. You're opening yourself up to the possibility of being rejected, of being not liked, perhaps, and especially in an increasingly divisive world. And Krish has talked about the kind of culture wars. There's a fear of, if I say this thing, I heard someone say to me, I'm scared of this opinion that I have. And that was the first time I heard someone say they were scared of an opinion. But I think it's what they're getting at, is they're scared of the consequence of that opinion. What happens if I say how I really feel, what I'm really thinking, and you reject me? What's the cost of that? And so I think, there is a cost to being vulnerable. There is a cost to being, anyone who's one of the joys that I get to do as part of my role is, walk with couples preparing for marriage and do marriage prep. And you'll see that in very real terms, the kind of cost of opening yourself up, opening your life up to someone is a very scary thing to do. But I think on the other side of that risk, on the other side of that bold step, that leap of faith, whatever you want to call it, if you're brave enough to open yourself up to someone else in whatever capacity, there could be a conversation down the pub or after the gym or whatever it would be, even that one conversation, I think will go a long way into the building blocks of seeing a longer journey towards opening yourself up, being part of community and feeling connected to other people and to ourselves, I think.
Brilliant. So two of the key things that I've heard loud and clear, and we are going to have to start wrapping up now, which is awful because I want to just talk for another 3 hours, although Sonia, I think you do need to lie down. But two of the key things that I've really heard loud and clear are resilience. How do we help build resilience as a reaction around loneliness, but also vulnerability? I think those are really, really helpful concepts. But I'm going to go back to the panelists now for closing comments and what you'd want to say to anyone listening today about playing their part in this role. So, Lisa, to you first, please.
Thank you. Just a few words from me. So one of the themes that's come out for us, and we've heard it here this evening, is empathy for others and hearing their stories, because it helps to build connections. And having our own stories heard is that it's really vital, isn't it, for understanding the world around us and feeling connected. And then providing opportunities. I mean, I've just been overwhelmed by people on the panel and how many opportunities they've provided for people to become connected, looking out for people in their own communities, and offering that hospitality and response to crisis. It's absolutely phenomenal. So we can do things, and we've had some really great examples, and it does make a difference. That connection and kindness and compassion absolutely makes a difference, even in the most difficult of times.
Thank you. Wonderful. Krish.
Wow, yeah, I agree with all that's been said. I've just realised that Ryan Rodrigues is the Reverend Ryan Rodrigues, triple R. That's so cool. You're like a superhero.
You're doing good.
I mean, yeah, this session's open to everyone of all faiths and backgrounds. But for me, as a Christian, the kind of balance of, or the rhythm of rest is quite important. You know, this idea of a Sabbath, which is true in the Jewish faith as well as the Christian faith, that not every day needs to be the same. One day to kind of reset and try and connect again. For me, that's trying to connect with God, but also connect with my community. And so the discipline of going to church and being with people that are really different to me. We share a common faith, but we're from very different backgrounds, different demographics, different races. And I find that very, some days I don't want to go. I'd rather stay in bed. It's been a busy week, but even just kind of pushing myself beyond that to go and connect with other people outside of my immediate circle has been really healthy for me over, the last, I suppose, 30 years since I've been a Christian. So I think there's some kind of ancient wisdom there that might be useful to all.
Thank you. Ryan.
Oh, yeah, I mean, echo everything that's been said, although I couldn't possibly comment on not wanting to go to church and feeling too groggy to attend. I think I've been inspired by what the panelists have shared tonight, and I'm actually just really happy that we've been having this conversation. And I think, as Lisa was saying, it's kind of sparked an idea, which, social media, it kind of encourages us to say statements. What it hasn't done is encourage us to ask questions. And fundamentally, that's how we build relationship. It's asking, tell me your story. I want to get to know about you. And then as that's reciprocated, relationships are formed, communities grow. And so one encouragement to everyone, a tiny, very practical thing. Who is it you have in your network today? It might be family, might be someone on social media. How can you ask questions? How can you tell your story and take that little step into building relationships?
Amazing. Sonia, you have about 20 seconds to be very wise.
Very wise. Okay, so I think I agree with everyone else, and I love the idea what Krish said about having reset and rest. I think that's particularly important, actually, reset and rest from your phones, from social media, and get into your communities. But I think, yes, there's things we can be doing as individuals, but I guess my sort of message to everyone here on this call is that we also need to understand that this is a societal issue and a systemic issue, and we need systemic solutions, from our politicians to address the loneliness in us.
Yeah. That health policy idea was absolutely, the health focus is so important. So thank you. I knew we'd run out of time, too much wisdom in one panel, but really, really more than anything, from a compassion in politics perspective, we are so grateful for the work that you're all doing. in this space, and please keep on doing it. Thank you to everyone who's attended today. It would be great to hear your feedback and your ideas. Please reach out to the organisations represented here and get involved, but we are just very, very grateful to be doing this together. Come and look at the work that we're doing at Compassion in Politics, get involved there. We would love your support and help. There's a lot to do at the moment. But for now, on this webinar, goodbye, and thank you so much for being involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. God bless. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Really, really appreciate it.